Good evening, class. My name is William Sean Kinsey Jr., and today I'm going to be doing the case analysis on Lange versus National Biscuit Company. The name of the plaintiff is Jerome Lange. The name of the defendant is the National Biscuit Company. Jerome Lange was the manager of a small grocery store in Minnesota that carried Nabisco cookies. Nabisco hired Ronald Lynch, appointed him as the cookie salesman trainee in the month of October of 1968. Fast forward to March 1st, 1969, Mr. Lynch received his own territory for cookie distribution. Within that route or in his territory, he actually comes in the past with Mr. Lange, whose store is obviously is in his territory. Over the span of 3 months from March 1st to May 1st of 1969, Nabisco received a multitude of complaints in regard to Mr. Lynch's behavior. He had an aggressive nature toward a lot of the patrons, and obviously they weren't comfortable or did not tolerate that, of course, during their experience at the grocery store, and also his lack of space and respect for other cookie competitors. He did not allow them to have any space on the shelves. March 1st of 1969 is when the case initially is the base of the case, and that's where we are imposing the liability under the notion of respondent superior to Mr. Lynch in regard to the National Biscuit Company. The argument that ensued between the two parties, Mr. Lynch and Mr. Lange, was a verbal argument that quickly turned combative, in the sense of Mr. Lange politely asked and professionally asked him to quit from refraining from any profanity. He refused, and then he continued to physically provoke Mr. Lange, whom did not retaliate, and then was physically assaulted. He later on, in an irate and irrational manner, decided to wipe all the cookies off the shelf and spew them on the floor and stormed out of off the premises. This case ended up going to trial court. Mr. Lange filed a suit against Nabisco for the unprofessional behavior of Mr. Lynch, and the verdict awarded damages to Mr. Lange on the premise that Mr. Lynch's actions were beyond the scope of his employment. Nabisco filed a motion for judgment, notwithstanding the verdict. They wanted to actually reverse the conclusion, mainly because there was no concrete evidence, or it also was the fact of they were going off the premise of Mr. Lynch was functioning under his own will and his own interest at the time of the altercation. Nabisco was granted their motion, which the trial judge did reverse, and based on his belief that the opinion had no factual basis. Lange filed an appeal upon reversal of the decision. We fast forward a couple of years. Now is October 1973. The Minnesota Supreme Court actually ends up taking up the case, and the constitutional argument rested upon accurately proving that Mr. Lynch was acting within the scope of his requirements. The judicial opinion revolved around the doctrine of respondeat superior. This doctrine holds that a company such as Nabisco is liable for the acts of its employees. The assault on Mr. Lange took place during the work-related limits of place and time, because it occurred on the authorized premises, which was assigned to Mr. Lynch. The court decided to further examine this a little bit further, just to see if there would be a parallel between the initial argument and also the confrontation that led to the assault of Mr. Lange, which they were able to come to a conclusion, and the case was overruled because Lynch was within the scope of his appointment, because the grocery store was his territory. So they had a reason to believe that Lynch was encouraged to become confrontational with Mr. Lange, because it continued the business of Nabisco. An important precedent was set due to this case. Lange versus National Biscuit Company Supreme Court case did help set precedents in the importance of establishing whether the employee of a company's ethical behavior overlap with the nature of their employment. Such example would be with Parnes versus Hino Commodities Incorporated. The plaintiff, Albert Parnes, and the defendant, Hino Commodities, is a brokerage firm. Mr. Parnes and also his sister, Miss Christensen, they were customers of the broker firm, and they filed a suit against the brokerage firm due to fraudulent actions against both two employees for fraudulent misstatements. Larry Costello and Pat Keever used trading methods that were not in the client's best interest, and they made fraudulent misstatements to them reoccurringly, even after Mr. Parnes did tell them to stop and to just cease with actions that they were conducting. They made unauthorized trades, and they did not even consult him about any of these trades, especially when this is his money that they are dealing with. And they didn't watch his accounts, and due to that, he lost over $35,000. At that point, he did file a suit against them, and they both were mindful of their unethical behavior. This case was tried with the respondeat superior, but they were unable to allow to make the doctrine actually apply to this case, only because it was deemed bizarre just because of the nature of the case. The two employees who were under Hino Commodities were acting in their own interest. They were not actually acting in the interest of their employer. So therefore, the employer also was a victim due to the fact that these fraudulent crimes were also a hindrance to their business. The Lange versus the National Biscuit Company case and the Parnes versus Hino Commodities case do parallel in ways, especially with the elements that pertain to the to the doctrine, because they do have in some way affect the company's liability and how the company can be still responsible for that employee. And there's also a case that still functions under this notion, such as O'Connor versus McDonald's. The only difference with this case is the plaintiff is trying to use the doctrine in a way that states that the employee was under the direction of McDonald's, even though he was not physically or anywhere near the premises of the employer. O'Connor versus McDonald's had a very significant impact, for instance, on the individual. He was in an accident. He was struck on his motorcycle, and unfortunately, he had severe bodily damages that resulted in permanent disability. And upon that, he ended up attempting to file a suit against McDonald's in California. McDonald's was able to get notified of this filing, but they were able to state that the employee was nowhere near the campus or any other locations nearby that were associated or affiliated with McDonald's. He was acting under his own will. He actually had just recently came from his coworker's house. He didn't directly go home, so he wasn't he wasn't still under the direction of his employer. So actually, he was functioning under his own will. Therefore, the ruling came back, and it came back in favor of McDonald's because they are not responsible for the nature or the trends of their employees and how they leave and come and go to work. My analysis is just based off of pharmaceuticals and how they do not hold any type of responsibility due to the fact that they do make medication that is debilitating and addicting both to patients and to others. They have advertisements that can seem to be very misleading, and the ethical behavior is of great importance, and any deviation from it resulting in illness or death of the patient. Liability and responsibility are essential in providing the most accurate care to patients. The billionaire Sackler family, for example, was behind the creation of highly addictive opiate drugs such as Oxycontin and has long denied responsibility for the actions of their employees and their advertisements. I would recommend that the federal courts take respondeat superior into more consideration and manufacture more specific guidelines based around it to help eliminate the chances of another prescription based crisis emerging. To conclude, the case of Lange versus National Biscuit Company has helped to set significant precedents about companies being held liable for the unethical behaviors of their employees. The nature of the specific crime, as well as the physical location of the crime, commonly represents a significant hurdle for plaintiffs when trying to verify company liability. Aspects of associated with the scope of employment seems to be the most critical component of the respondeat superior doctrine. And this is where I got all my information from. And I do look forward to hearing any of your comments, anything that I could definitely improve upon. And I really hope you guys enjoyed yourself. And thank you. Hope you guys have a wonderful day and happy holidays.